Hospitals are never truly silent, but sometimes the quietest sounds are the ones you shouldn't follow. At 3:00 a.m., when most of the city sleeps, Karachi General becomes something else entirely. The corridors grow colder, machines beep in irregular rhythms, shadows stretch too far, and whispers slip under the doors of rooms long since sealed. Aisha, a young nurse working her first week of night shifts, knows the hospital's reputation, but she doesn't believe in ghosts. Not until she starts hearing slow, deliberate footsteps pacing the empty ward at the far end of the corridor. Footsteps no one else can hear. Footsteps leading to a set of locked doors everyone insists no longer exists, drawn by an old nurse's journal and a voice calling her name. Aisha uncovers the hospital's buried history and a presence desperate to escape. But when she opens the door to help, she discovers some doors aren't meant to be opened, and some nurses aren't meant to come back. Aisha pulled her cardigan tighter around her scrub top as the automatic doors of St. Mercy Hospital hissed shut behind her. The September night was damp and heavy, and the hospital's glass facade reflected the dull yellow streetlights like a row of tired eyes. It was almost midnight, her shift again, the long, thin hours when most of the hospital slept and the building became an echo of itself. She swiped her badge, the scanner's green light flicking weakly, and stepped inside. Even after 3 years of nights, she still felt the building's temperature drop after dark. The heating system worked fine during the day, but at night the corridors turned cold, the way subway tunnels do when trains stop running. The security guard at the front desk, Nasir, raised his coffee cup. "You're in early, or everyone else is late," Aisha said, managing a smile. She liked Nasir. He'd worked here since the late 90s and had a blunt way of dismissing ghost stories, though he still made the sign of the cross whenever power flickered. "You're covering Ward C tonight?" he asked. "C and the step-down unit," she said, pulling her hair back into a bun. "They're short again." "Watch yourself," he said. "That whole wing's weird. Especially E." She rolled her eyes. "Ward E's been closed for years." "Doors don't stay closed on their own," Nasir muttered. The fluorescent lights in the main corridor buzzed, a faint mosquito whining over the smell of antiseptic. The newer wings gleamed digital monitors, automatic doors, muted wallpaper meant to calm the patients. But when Aisha turned left toward the older wing, she stepped back in time. Narrow hallways, pale green paint from the 70s, ceiling tiles sagging slightly. She checked the whiteboard at the nurse's station. Only 4 patients tonight, 2 post-surgical recoveries, 1 elderly cardiac, and a young man detoxing from opioids. The other rooms on the floor were empty. She loved nights for this. Fewer visitors, fewer supervisors. A quiet way to get things done. But lately the quiet felt crowded, as if silence itself were waiting. She started rounds, her sneakers squeaking faintly. Each patient's room had the same glow of soft blue monitor light. Machines beeped at steady intervals. She adjusted drips, scribbled vitals, and offered water. By the time she finished, it was 12:30 a.m. Back at the station, she poured herself weak coffee and began charting on the computer. The cursor blinked on a blank field. She could hear the faint hum of the vending machine down the hall, a sound so constant it usually disappeared. Tonight it felt louder. Then she heard it, a single footstep. Not a creak, not a gurney wheel, a footstep. Aisha froze. The sound had come from down the hall, near the door to Ward Eve, the abandoned wing sealed off after a fire 10 years ago. She waited, pen poised. Another step. Soft, deliberate. Heel then toe, as though someone was walking slowly, barefoot or in worn shoes. She stood, the hair at the back of her neck rising. "Nasir," she called softly. Silence. She walked to the nurse's station door and looked down the corridor. The dim EXIT sign cast a bloody glow over the far end. The double doors to Ward E were closed, paint peeling slightly where the lock had been welded. No movement. She forced herself to breathe. Old buildings settle. Pipes hiss. You hear things when you're tired. She went back to charting, telling herself she'd imagined it. At 1:10 a.m., she went to check on Mr. Raza, the elderly cardiac patient in room 204. He was awake, eyes glassy. "Nurse," he whispered as she adjusted his oxygen. "You're not alone." Aisha frowned. "What do you mean?" "Footsteps," he said. "Been hearing them since they put me here. They don't like this wing." She tried to soothe him. "You're hearing staff walking by. It's late. Your mind plays tricks." He shook his head, papery skin trembling. "Not staff." "Who?" "The one who waits." Aisha smiled politely and adjusted his blanket. "Try to rest." But when she left his room, she realized her palms were damp. Back at the station, she found a small folded paper on her desk. She hadn't left it there. In smudged pencil it read, "Don't follow the footsteps." Her heart kicked against her ribs. She looked around. The hallway is empty. Monitors beeping softly. She crumpled the note and shoved it into her pocket. Someone was playing a joke. It had to be. At 2:00 a.m., she went to the supply closet for saline bags. The closet door creaked as she pulled it open. Inside smelled of latex gloves and bleach. She took what she needed, shut the door, and turned. There, at the far end of the corridor, stood a figure, only for a second. A flash of pale blue uniform, old-fashioned cap, then gone. She blinked. Nothing there now but a dim hallway. Her pulse raced. She returned to the station and picked up the phone to call Nasir at the front desk. "Are you walking the halls?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Nope," he said. "I'm stuck at the cameras." "Can you check the feed near Ward E?" "Hold on." A pause. Then, "That camera's been dead for years." "Power issue." "Why? Nothing," she said quickly. "Never mind." At 3:15 a.m., she made another round. The detox patient moaned in his sleep. In 204, Mr. Raza whispered to himself, eyes fixed on the ceiling. In the empty rooms, her footsteps echoed too loudly, as if someone walked in time with her. She kept glancing toward the sealed doors of Ward E. The sign above them still read "Isuion. The edges of the sign were brown with age. She thought she heard breathing beyond the door. She pressed her ear to the metal. Silence. Then a faint whisper. "Nurse." She jerked back so hard she hit the opposite wall. She fled to the nurse's station and locked herself inside. She could hear the hum of the monitors, her own ragged breathing, and far off, down the hall, the slow, deliberate tread of someone walking. Step, step. It stopped just outside the station door. She clapped a hand over her mouth, heart hammering. Nothing moved. Then, from the crack under the door, a thin wisp of cold air slid in, smelling faintly of old disinfectant and something sweet, like lilies left too long in water. By 5 a.m., the footsteps stopped. The hospital began to wake, staff arriving, lights brightening. Aisha finished her charting with trembling hands. Nasir gave her a puzzled look when she left at dawn. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," she said, but she didn't look back at the building as she walked to her car. In her pocket, the crumpled note burned against her palms, "Don't follow the footsteps." Aisha arrived for her next shift with a carefully neutral face. Sleep had been impossible all day. Every time she drifted off, she dreamed of tiled corridors stretching forever, a nurse's cap floating ahead of her, and footsteps echoing in time with her heartbeat. She told herself it was exhaustion, stress, or a prank. But the image of the note, "Don't follow the footsteps," sat behind her eyes like a watermark. Nasir greeted her again at the front desk. "Long day?" he asked. "Too long." He looked her over. "You're pale. Want me to walk you to the station?" Aisha shook her head. "I'm fine. Just tired." But as she walked the now familiar corridor toward Ward C, she felt that prickle again, as if she were being watched by something patient and unseen. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and old wallpaper paste. She noticed a tiny smear of dried brown on the baseboard outside Ward E. Rust. Old blood. She couldn't tell. Tonight she had 5 patients, including 2 new admissions from the ER, a young woman post-appendectomy, an older man with pneumonia. She tried to ground herself in the routine of vitals, IV checks, and charting. Her hands moved automatically, but her ears strained for any sound from the sealed ward. When she checked on Mr. Raza, he grabbed her wrist. His hand was cool and fragile, but surprisingly strong. "She's awake," he whispered. Aisha's mouth went dry. "Ooh," he stared toward the ceiling. "The nurse. The one they locked away." "Master Raza," she began, but he cut her off. "Don't follow her. Promise me." She promised, if only to calm him, and gently pried his fingers from her arm. Back at the nurse's station, she found something on her desk again. Not a note this time, but an old brass hospital badge, tarnished green. It read MARIAMS RN. The letters were engraved in a style from the 1970s. Aisha's stomach dropped. She'd read about a nurse named Miriam in old staff records while orienting years ago. A nurse who'd vanished after a ward fire. Her photo had been black and white, her eyes oddly intense. She flipped the badge over. On the back, scratched with something sharp, "Help me." She dropped it, the metal clattering loudly in the quiet room. Around 1 a.m., Dr. Kamran stopped by the station to sign charts. Aisha debated telling him about the footsteps, the note, the badge. But his expression stopped her. He was the sort of doctor who rolled his eyes at anything unscientific. "You okay?" he asked, scribbling. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just tired." He glanced at her coffee cup. "Don't overdo it. Night shift can mess with your head." She nodded, biting back a reply. At 20:30 a.m., she heard them again, footsteps, slow and deliberate. From beyond the double doors of Ward E, tonight they sounded closer, as if someone were pacing just on the other side. Aisha stood in the hall, heart racing, the badge in her pocket like a cold coin. She took a single step toward the sealed doors. "Don't follow the footsteps," Mr. Raza had said. But she had to know. She pressed her ear to the seam. The sound stopped immediately, silence so deep she could hear her own pulse. Then, faintly, a child's voice whispered from inside, "Help her." Aisha staggered back. She fled to the occupied rooms to calm herself. In 203, the appendectomy patient slept soundly. In 205, the detox patient sat awake, eyes wide. "Who's talking in the hall?" he demanded. "I heard it." Aisha swallowed hard. "Nobody. Go back to sleep." But his words unsettled her more. Proof it wasn't only in her head. At 3:15 a.m., she entered an unused treatment room to check equipment. The curtain divider swayed slightly, though no vent was on. She stood still, waiting. From behind the curtain came a sound like someone drawing a deep breath. She yanked the curtain back. No one there. Just an empty gurney, straps dangling like limp fingers. She turned to leave, but stopped in the wall mirror above the sink. Her reflection wasn't alone. A second figure stood just behind her in the reflection. A nurse in a pale blue uniform. Face blurred as though smeared by water. Aisha spun. The room is empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. Her phone buzzed. It was Nasir from the security desk. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Why?" she said, voice too sharp. "Because the motion sensor in Ward E just tripped," he said slowly. "We don't have cameras there, but the alarm light came on for a second." Aisha gripped the phone. "Could be rats." "Could be," he said, "but it hasn't tripped in 10 years. At 4 a.m., Aisha went back to the supply closet. She needed a moment to breathe, to get away from the patient rooms, to calm down. But when she opened the door, she found it colder than the rest of the hall. Icy, like walking into a freezer. Her breath puffed in front of her. In the far corner sat an old wheelchair she'd never seen before. Its leather cracked, its wheels rusted. A hospital ID tag still hung from the handle. Ward E isolation unit. She backed out slowly, shut the door, and leaned against the wall until her heart slowed. When she returned to Mr. Raza's room at 4:30 a.m., he was sitting upright, staring at the door. "She's coming," he whispered. "Tonight she crosses the hall." Aisha tried to hush him, but he grabbed her wrist again. "She can't hurt you if you don't follow," he said. "Promise me again," she promised. But as she left the room, she thought she heard a soft female laugh echoing faintly down the corridor. The hospital's night slowly gave way to a pale, gray pre-dawn light. Staff arrived early for day shift, bringing chatter and footsteps of their own. Aisha finished her charting, her hands trembling again. In her pocket, the brass badge pulsed coldly, as if absorbing the last heat from her body. On her way out, she glanced down the hall at the sealed doors of Ward E. For a moment, she thought she saw the edge of a blue nurse's cap just vanishing behind them. Then the doors were still, silent as stone. Aisha spent the following day in a haze. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the hollow step echo of unseen feet. She replayed everything from the last 2 nights. The whisper at the sealed door, the badge with "Help Me" scratched on the back, Mr. Roz's warnings. By mid-afternoon, she gave up. She made tea and sat at her kitchen table scrolling her phone, fingers trembling. Her browser history was full of odd searches: St. Mercy Hospital fire, Nurse Miriam disappeared, Wardy history. Most of the hits were urban legends on small blogs, ghost hunters, amateur historians. She found a local newspaper article from 1983, "Nurse missing after ward fire," but it was behind a paywall. She closed her laptop. She'd get the real files tonight. St. Mercy's night shift started with rain. The hospital's glass facade was beaded with droplets, reflecting the ambulance lights like 1,000 tiny eyes. Nasir looked up from his desk as she entered. "You're back," he said. "Thought you'd take a sick day." "I'm fine," Aisha lied. "How's the motion sensor?" "No trip tonight." He squinted at her. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm just tired." He handed her a small keycard. "You didn't get this from me." "What's this?" "Basement archives," he said. "If you're going to poke around about Miriam, at least do it with the real files." Aisha blinked. "How do you?" He cut her off with a shrug. "Old buildings keep old ghosts. Some of us make peace with that." She pocketed the keycard. On her break at 1 a.m., Aisha slipped down the back stairwell to the basement. The smell changed immediately. Damp concrete, old paper, something faintly medicinal. The walls sweated moisture. The archive's door was a heavy metal slab with a faded sign Reiko das TFONLY. She swiped the keycard. The lock clicked, the door groaning open. Inside rows of filing cabinets, shelves of boxes stacked to the ceiling. The air was cool and dry, the hum of a dehumidifier the only sound. She turned on a small desk lamp. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she started with a dozen manila folders. Mabry, Mackenzie, Miriam SRN. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photocopies of incident reports, staff memos, and a single black and white photo of a woman in an old-style nurse uniform, smiling faintly. Underneath, Miriam Samina, RN, hired 1974. She looked about 30 in the picture, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. Aisha flipped through the papers. The last report: fire in isolation ward, October 1983. Several patients died. Miriam, missing, presumed dead. Another memo caught her eye, handwritten, unsigned, dated 2 weeks before the fire. Miriam has been filing complaints about the conditions in the isolation ward. She claims unethical procedures are being carried out after hours. We must review her access privileges. Aisha's pulse quickened. Unethical procedures. The hospital had always been quiet about its past, but this smelled like a cover-up. At the bottom of the file lay a small cloth-bound notebook, water, damaged but still legible. Scrawled on the first page, "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. My name is Miriam Samina, and I am not mad." Aisha flipped carefully through the pages. Entries described long night shifts, overworked staff, and a Project Grace. Some kind of trial on terminal patients in Ward E. Miriam had been documenting secret treatments, high-voltage therapy, sensory deprivation, experimental drugs. She wrote that several patients had begged her for help, claiming they were being raced. The final entry ended mid-sentence. "They know I'm writing this." Tonight the footsteps, and then nothing but a smudge of ash across the page. Somewhere behind her, in the darkness between the shelves, something moved. Aisha froze, clutching the notebook. Step, slow, deliberate, coming closer. She spun a lamp, throwing a weak cone of light. Nothing but stacked boxes and file cabinets. She grabbed the photo of Miriam and stuffed it and the journal into her scrub pocket. She flicked off the lamp and slipped out of the archives, heart hammering. When she returned to the nurse's station, she found the badge again, but now it was warm, almost hot. She dropped it onto the counter and stared. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Do not go back down there." She deleted it immediately, hands shaking. At 20:30 am, unable to stop herself, she walked back to the sealed doors of Ward E. This time she brought her phone flashlight. She pressed her palm against the metal. "Who are you?" she whispered. Silence. Then softly, from the other side, "Help me." Aisha's heart ached. The voice sounded fragile, desperate, less like a monster and more like a woman drowning. She glanced around. No one in sight. She pressed harder. "Miriam." The door vibrated under her hand, just once, like a heartbeat. Mr. Raza began shouting. She ran to his room. He was sitting upright, eyes wild. "She's in the hall!" he cried. "She's at the door!" Aisha tried to calm him, but he gripped her wrist. "Don't open it!" "You'll let her in." But Aisha wasn't sure if he meant the ghost or something else. Back at the station, she examined Miriam's photo under the desk lamp. When she tilted it, faint writing appeared on the back, almost invisible. "Find the room with no window." Her stomach turned. She remembered that behind Ward E's main hallway was an old isolation chamber with no windows, used for quarantine decades ago. She called the front desk. "Nasir." What was Ward E before it closed? "Why?" he asked, instantly wary. "Just tell me." A pause. "Isolation for infectious diseases. Then psych experiments in the 70s. Bad ones. They sealed it after the fire." Was there a windowless room? He was silent for a long time. "A few. But one in particular. The chamber at the far end. Don't go there, Aisha. Promise me." She hung up without answering. Near dawn, she smelled lilies again, faint decaying. She looked up from charting. Down the corridor, the double doors of Ward E stood as always, sealed. But on the floor just outside them lay a single white lily, petals browned at the edges. She crouched, picked it up. The stem was wet as if freshly cut. In her pocket, Miriam's notebook seemed to throb with cold. By her fourth consecutive night shift, Aisha felt the hospital inside her skull. Every monitor beep drilled into her ears. Every antiseptic whiff turned her stomach. She'd been reading and rereading Miriam's journal between patient rounds, memorizing its slanted handwriting. And the more she read, the less she trusted her own senses. She caught herself staring at corners where no one stood, flinching at the hiss of automatic doors, jumping at the beep of the elevator. Her reflection in the polished metal sometimes lagged a second behind her movements. Mr. Raza's warning repeated in her head like a mantra, "Don't follow her." Rain lashed the hospital windows as she arrived at midnight. Nasir met her at the door again, coffee in hand, his eyes bloodshot. "You look worse," he said softly. "Thanks," she muttered. He leaned closer. "I talked to one of the old orderlies. He said Miriam's body was never found, only her badge and her shoes. Everything else burned." Aisha shivered. "Why tell me that now?" "Because if she's still walking these halls," he trailed off. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. As Aisha entered Ward C, she immediately noticed the air was colder. Not just the normal night chill. This was refrigerator cold curling under her sleeves. The vents hissed with a steady, almost whispering sound. She checked her patients. The new appendectomy patient was crying softly in her sleep. The detox patient muttered nonsense. Mr. Raza stared at the ceiling, lips moving silently. At the nurse's station, she found the lily from last night lying on her keyboard, but now its petals were blackened, curling inward like claws. At 1 a.m., while updating charts, Aisha heard it again, a whisper, soft but clear. Aisha, her name. She spun, no one behind her. The sound had come from the hallway leading to Ward E. She stood, every nerve alert. The whisper again, closer, help me. She took a step toward the hall before she could stop herself. An alarm beeped from room 204. Mr. Raz's heart monitor spiked. She hurried in. He was sitting up, clutching his chest, eyes bulging. "She's calling you?" he rasped. "Don't answer." "I'm not." "She needs someone to open the door," he gasped. "Don't you open it." Aisha adjusted his oxygen and tried to soothe him. "You're safe. Just breathe." But she could feel the chill deepening. When she stepped back into the hallway, she glanced toward the observation window of the unused treatment room. For a split second, she saw a woman's face there, pressed against the glass. Pale, eyes dark, mouth moving soundlessly. Then it was gone. Aisha's legs trembled. She pressed a hand to her pocket, feeling the outline of Miriam's notebook. At 200 a.m. on her break, she opened the notebook again at the nurse's station. She'd read the final entries many times, but now she noticed faint indentations on the next blank page. She shaded over them with her pen. Words emerged. Room with no window. Basement, key in locker 12. She blinked. Basement, locker 12. That must be the old staff changing room. When the ward quieted, she slipped down the stairwell to the basement again. The smell of damp and old detergent clung to the air. Rows of rusted lockers lined the wall. She found locker 12. It was padlocked, but the lock hung open as though waiting. Inside lay an ancient key on a ribbon, a paper tag tied to it reedy, Isolation Room Zoo E. Aisha's stomach lurched. She tucked the key into her scrub pocket and shut the locker, heartbeat thudding. Her phone vibrated. Nasir's name. "Where are you?" he asked. "Basement," she whispered. "Get upstairs now," he said. The motion sensors going off like crazy. She ran back up, key rattling in her pocket. At 3 a.m. the ward had changed. The lights flickered. The hallway smelled of smoke and lilies. The sealed doors of Ward E seemed to bulge inward, as though something pressed from the other side. The whispers came louder now, overlapping, a chorus. "Help her! Don't leave me! Open!" She pressed her hands to her ears. "Stop!" she whispered. She turned and saw the pale blue figure at the far end of the hall, unmistakable this time. A nurse in a 1970s uniform, cap askew, face grayish and blurred. She took one step toward Aisha, then another, her shoes leaving wet prints on the tile. Aisha backed up until she hit the station desk. "What do you want?" she whispered. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward Ward E. Her mouth moved. No sound came out, but Aisha could read the words. Room with no window. Then she vanished. The detox patient began screaming. Aisha ran in, found him curled in a ball. "She's in the room," he sobbed. "She's in the room." Mr. Raz's monitor flatlined for a moment, then resumed. He opened his eyes. "She's stronger tonight," he rasped. "You can't stop her." Aisha felt like the walls were bending inward. Back at the station, another note lay on her keyboard in the same smudged pencil as before. "If you go, you won't come back." She crumpled it, threw it in the trash, and clutched the old key in her pocket. 400 a.m. The whispers stopped. The ward fell eerily silent. Even the machines seemed muted. She stared at the sealed doors. She thought of Miriam alone, writing in her journal. She thought of patients crying in the dark. She thought of the key in her pocket. She rose. She walked to the double doors. They were cold enough to frost over. She pressed the key against the seam. It didn't fit anywhere, but as soon as the metal touched the door, she heard a soft click from inside, like an old lock disengaging. She stepped back. The doors trembled once, then stilled. Behind them a voice, no longer a whisper but clear, calling her name. Aisha. She fled back to the station, heart hammering, slamming the door behind her. As morning light seeped through the windows, the cold receded. Machines beeped normally. Patients slept. The sealed doors of Ward E were motionless again, but the key in her pocket had turned ice cold, and on its paper tag, new words had appeared in smudged pencil: tonight. Aisha barely slept after her fourth shift. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the pale face behind the glass, or felt the cold key burning her palm. She woke twice gasping, thinking she heard someone whispering her name in her apartment. By evening, she had the look of someone haunted already, eyes ringed in violet, hands trembling as she buttoned her uniform. The key lay on her nightstand where she'd left it, still ice cold to the touch, its tag still reading. Tonight. She slipped it into her scrub pocket like a talisman. Dark clouds pressed low over Karachi. By the time she reached the hospital at 11:45 p.m., rain was hammering the pavement and thunder growled like something alive. Nasir met her at the side entrance, jacket soaked, eyes wary. "You shouldn't be here," he said immediately. "I have to finish my shift," she replied. "No, not tonight." He stepped closer. "You heard it too, didn't you? The voices." She nodded slowly. He swallowed hard. "Then you know what's in Ward E, do you?" she asked. "Just enough to stay out." He grabbed her wrist. "Promise me you'll stay out." She pulled free gently. "I can't promise." The thunder boomed. When Aisha entered Ward C, she found it strangely still. The detox patient had been transferred. Mr. Raz's bed was empty. A note on the clipboard said, "Moved to ICU." Only 2 surgical recovery patients slept behind curtains, their monitors steady and calm. The atmosphere felt stripped, like the hospital itself was holding its breath. On the nurse's station keyboard lay yet another lily, perfectly white, with a single drop of red at its center. At 12:30 a.m., she opened Miriam's journal again. A new line had appeared in the margins, faint and gray. "It opens at 3. Her hands shook. At 200 a.m., as she checked the IV of one of the surgical patients, she heard the first footstep. Soft, deliberate, from the hall behind her. Then another. The whisper floated down the hall, unmistakable this time. "This way." She turned toward the sealed double doors of Ward E. A faint line of frost traced their seam, pulsing like a heartbeat. Her phone buzzed. Nasir again. "Don't do it," he said, as soon as she picked up. "How do you?" "I'm watching the cameras. The temperature in E dropped to 0. Motion sensors are going crazy. Please, Aisha, leave. I have to know," she whispered. "Aisha." She hung up. At 2:59 a.m., she stood before the sealed doors, the old brass key in her palm. The whispers rose, no longer distinct words, but a low chorus, like 100 patients murmuring at once. The frost on the doors thickened, curling into delicate fern shapes. She inserted the key into a barely visible slot at the edge of the frame. With a heavy clunk, the mechanism turned by itself. The doors eased inward a few centimeters, releasing a gust of air that smelled of old disinfectant, wet concrete, and something sore like decaying flowers. Her breath fogged in front of her face. She pushed the door open. Ward E's hallway was narrow and dim, lit only by flickering emergency lights. The floor tiles were mismatched and stained. The walls bore faint smears like fingerprints dragged in dust. Every sound echoed too long. Her shoes squeaked on the wet floor. She realized the wetness was not water, but something thicker, leaving faint red streaks on her soles. She tried not to look too closely. Somewhere ahead, someone coughed, a dry, ancient sound. The first door she passed had no window, just a black plaque reading ZUC. Another door, ZOD. At the end of the hall, second E. That was the one. She paused outside it. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She could feel the presence on the other side, not like a person but like a storm behind glass. The old key vibrated in her pocket. She opened the door. A gust of freezing air rolled over her. The room was larger than it should have been, stretching into shadow. Old hospital beds lined the walls, all empty, their sheets yellowed and torn. IV stands stood like skeletons. In the center of the room stood a single chair, facing away from her. She stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. The chair creaked. A figure rose from it back to her. A nurse's uniform from decades ago. Cap crooked, hair dark and wet as though she'd been pulled from water. Her shoulders heaved with ragged breaths. "Miriam," Aisha whispered. The figure turned. The face was indeed Miriam's, or what remained of it. Eyes black pits, mouth split too wide, skin pale, veins branching like tree roots. "Help me," the thing whispered. I found your journal," Aisha said, voice trembling. "I know what happened." Miriam's head tilted unnaturally far to one side. "They locked me here," she rasped. Patients screaming. "Fire! No exit!" Aisha took a step closer, ignoring the frost creeping up her shoes. "You're trapped." "Not for long," Miriam hissed. "The door's open now." She raised a skeletal hand. "You opened it." Aisha's heart pounded. "I wanted to help." "You did." Miriam's mouth twisted into something like a smile. "Now I can leave." "But someone must stay." The room trembled. Beds rattled. IV stands toppled. The door behind Aisha sealed itself with a sound like stone grinding shut. "No," Aisha whispered. She lunged for the door, but her fingers slid off the freezing metal. Miriam drifted closer, feet not quite touching the floor. "Stay," she murmured. "Stay and I'll go. They'll forget you like they forgot me." "I can't." "You already did," Miriam said softly, and touched Aisha's forehead with a single cold finger. Images burst behind Aisha's eyes. Screaming patients, fire racing along the ceiling, the smell of burning hair, locked doors, her own voice shouting orders while flames swallowed oxygen. She saw Miriam pounding at the glass, saw hospital administrators turning keys and walking away. Then she saw herself, years older, standing at the nurse's station alone, calling out names into an empty ward. Aisha staggered back. "No," she said aloud. "This isn't my fate." She tore Miriam's journal from her pocket and hurled it to the floor. The pages burst open, fluttering. The frost on the tiles cracked like glass. Miriam screamed, a shriek that split the air. The lights flickered violently. The door handle glowed faintly. Aisha lunged for it, slammed the key into the lock. The door burst open, flinging her into the hall. She crawled forward, lungs burning with cold. Behind her, the door slammed shut on its own, a thunderclap echoing down the corridor. The whispers cut off abruptly. She lay on the floor of Ward C, gasping. The sealed doors were intact again, no seam, no frost, just a blank hospital wall. In her hand lay not the old brass key, but a cracked plastic hospital badge reading Miriam Khan, RN. At 4:15 a.m., Nasir burst through the stairwell, eyes wild. "Aisha!" What happened? The cameras went black. She couldn't answer at first. She simply stared at the badge, fingers trembling. "She's gone," she whispered finally. "Ooh, Miriam." Nasir looked from her to the sealed doors. "Then why do they look different?" She glanced back. The doors now bore a fresh sign painted in red. "Isolation ward closed. Do not enter." On the nurse's station keyboard lay another note, scrawled in the same smudged pencil as before. "Thank you." By the time sunlight touched the windows, the ward looked almost normal. The air warmed. Machines beeped steadily. Life returned. But Aisha knew something had shifted. She could still feel cold breath on the back of her neck, as if someone were standing very close, whispering words she couldn't quite hear. When she reached into her pocket, the badge was gone. For 2 nights afterward, Aisha moved through the hospital like a ghost herself. She completed her rounds, smiled at patients, signed charts. But her hands shook as she touched anything metal, and she avoided Ward E entirely. Nasir tried to coax her into talking. "You're different," he said quietly over coffee. "Like part of you stayed behind." She only nodded. On the third night, she felt it again, the faintest echo of footsteps in an empty corridor. Aisha began to see flickers of white at the edge of her vision. A nurse's cap turning a corner, the sweep of an outdated uniform disappearing into a stairwell. When she ran after it, she found only empty halls. Sometimes she caught her reflection in a window and thought, for a split second, she saw Miriam's face instead of her own, pale, eyes hollow, lips moving as though forming her name. One evening she found a folded note on the nurse's station. "Patients are still waiting." That night 3 alarms went off at once. Each patient whispered her name in their sleep. The supply closet door swung open and closed without wind. The hospital PA system crackled with faint, indecipherable muttering. She understood Miriam might be gone, but something had stayed. Or perhaps Aisha herself had become its new anchor. At 300 a.m. she stood again before the sealed doors. They looked perfectly normal now, no frost, no whispering, no lilies. But her badge refused to scan. The screen flashed red ACCSS DND. She pressed her palm to the door. Cold. Not as before, a subtler, deeper chill, like a pulse beneath the surface. Nasir appeared behind her, out of breath. "You're doing it again," he said softly. "You're going back in." "I have to know," she whispered. "If she's free, why am I still hearing her footsteps?" He put a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe she's not the one you're hearing." That evening, Aisha returned to the basement. The lockers were gone. Where locker 12 had been, there was now a blank concrete wall, smooth and fresh painted. She knocked on it. Solid. She sat on the floor, head in her hands. I opened the door. I let her out. "Why am I still here?" A voice behind her. "Because someone always stays." She spun. No one. Only the hum of pipes. The next night, during her shift in the ICU, she heard them again. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, pacing between beds. Each patient's monitor spiked as the invisible presence passed. One woman gasped awake and pointed at the far corner. "The nurse," she whispered. The nurse with no face. When Aisha looked, she saw a pale blue shape lingering by the curtains. For an instant it looked exactly like herself. Same uniform, same hair, but the face was blurred. Then it was gone. She began keeping her own journal, writing in the margins just as Miriam had. Her handwriting grew slanted, cramped. Her entries read like echoes. "They locked me here. No exit. Key in pocket. The door opens at 3. One night she flipped back and found an entry she didn't remember writing. "Help me." Nasir confronted her again at the break room. "I've read about this," he said. "There's a pattern. Every 20 years someone hears footsteps. They open the door. They let her out. And then what?" He hesitated. "Then they take her place." She stared at him. I think you're already halfway there," he said softly. "You need to leave. Transfer. Quit. Anything." But she knew it was already too late. She could feel the hospital in her veins, a low electric hum. The sealed doors of Ward E opened silently as she approached. No key, no code. They simply swung inward, welcoming her. She stepped through. This time there was no frost, no shadow, only the empty ward, lit in a steady blue glow. The beds stood ready, sheets clean and taut. A single chair waited in the center of the room. She sat down. Her own heartbeat slowed. The air pressed around her like water. She realized with a kind of terrible calm that the room felt like home. A hand settled gently on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She knew without looking who it was. Miriam's voice, not cold now but almost kind, whispered in her ear, "Thank you." Then silence. When Aisha looked up, the room was gone. Only the faint sound of footsteps in the empty ward, receding into darkness. Morning staff found Aisha's station neat and orderly, her badge clipped to the keyboard. her shift notes complete to the last entry, but Aisha herself was gone. The sealed doors of Ward E showed no sign of ever being opened. Security footage revealed nothing except a brief flicker at 300 a.m. as though the entire hall had blinked. Patients reported hearing soft footsteps that night. Some said they saw a new nurse making rounds. A young woman in modern scrubs, face pale, eyes empty, moving from bed to bed with a chart in hand. They began to call her the nurse who heard footsteps in the empty ward. Even now, staff sometimes say that if you're on the night shift and the ward grows cold at 3 a.m., you might hear a gentle voice behind you saying your name. And if you follow it, you'll find a closed door and a single white lily on the floor. Because in the hospital, someone always stays.
Subscribe for more videos.